Well, welcome back to the channel where this year we're doing friendship differently. And today we're going to build on the last couple of weeks because today we're going to talk about standing in a place where most women get stuck. It's that point when you realize a friendship has changed or it's expiring. It's already expired. You stayed too long, but you don't know what next looks like. You're kind of standing in this empty space and you don't have a plan and you're a little nervous. So today we're going to try to understand and try to navigate the in-between season of friendship. One is ending. Maybe you haven't met any new gals or gotten involved in anything new. But in January, we've been talking about what happens when a friendship quietly expires. If you haven't watched the last two videos, I hope you'll go back and watch them, because sometimes friendships end not because of a big argument, not because anyone betrayed you or you betrayed them, but because something shifted. And the connection that you once had just isn't there anymore, or it certainly isn't as strong anymore. You know, it rarely happens overnight. And most friendships, quite frankly, that are on their last leg go through a really stretched out period of growing apart. And sometimes it's painful because you're aware of it, and sometimes you're just oblivious. But in general, the friendship will start to slow down. You know, there won't be as many text messages, not as many get-togethers. You won't be confiding in each other like you used to, sharing everything with each other like you used to. And it becomes more about habit. I say more habitual than intentional. But when you get to that point where you stop justifying or explaining the relationship to yourself, when you start noticing the mental toll it's taking, maybe the physical toll it's taking. And so last week we talked about that guilt that women feel. We're constantly second guessing our feelings, thinking that maybe we're the problem, we're the one being disloyal for wanting something different. Maybe we're continuing to grow and change and our friend just isn't interested anymore. Maybe she doesn't want to talk about the things that we want to talk about. So today we're going to talk about that in-between season when you've made the decision. Maybe you haven't pulled the plug. Maybe you just pulled the plug. Maybe you're working on setting up new boundaries, but the friendship has changed. It has possibly ended, but you haven't filled that space yet. You just don't know what's next because, you know, no one prepares us for what we're going to feel when a friendship ends. And quite frankly, it's hard to talk to people about it because you don't want them to know or think that you're not a good friend. And we're getting to that age where we can't run out right away and replace an old friendship. So there's a pause. There's a sense of quiet. There are empty afternoons where you realize you don't have anyone to call. You don't have your old friend to text, to just check in with. So you start quite naturally to ask yourself, oh my gosh, am I going to be lonely? No. You tell yourself, I'm just pausing to make room. Room for what? Room for your what next. And at this stage of life, the silence, right, when no one answers back can be scary. And I think maybe in large part because time's no longer, it doesn't feel as infinite to us as it did when we were younger. We just didn't worry. We moved from group to group to group, and maybe it wasn't deep, but we didn't have to worry about what next. So how do we understand this season that we may be in? What your body and your mind is asking of you, and how to tell the difference between that loneliness we feel and healthy emotional space, because that's what we want this to be. But we have to ask ourselves a question, why this in-between times feels so uncomfortable. And it's this transitional time. Well, you know, most of us were never taught how to weather transitions. As I said, when we were younger, we just went from one thing or another. We had kids, we had responsibilities, we had careers. We didn't have time to worry about being alone or not having anything to do. And we're taught as young women to fix the relationship or to quickly fill the gap, right? Find something else to do. There's always something else to do. Fill up your calendar. But now when we hit this in-between season, we just can't make that happen on demand, and especially when we're over 50. Because I think friendship changes feel a lot heavier at our stage of life because, well, society tells us that once we get to this stage, it's harder to find new friends. Well, baloney. We just have to look at it differently. And we're also a little worried because we've already experienced a lot in our life. We've had losses, we've had transitions, we've had disappointments. And no one wants to lose a long-standing relationship because you've invested so much of yourself in it. You have a history. So when you feel that friendship starting to fade, it can trigger a bit of fear. What if this is it? What if I can't make new friends? What if I can't rebuild my social life? What if I end up all alone? But I think there's something important wrapped up in this. And that's the idea that having space and time to ourselves is not the same as loneliness. And quite honestly, what's the option? To keep putting up with a bunch of junk you don't want to put up with? So we have to try not to confuse space with loneliness because, yes, loneliness is a hurt in your heart. It's an absence of connection. It's a lack of nourishing you, filling yourself up. Whereas space is a pause that allows you the time to see if something healthier can grow, to maybe look at your life a little bit differently. And yes, they can feel similar, but they're not the same. And if we use or overuse the word lonely when we're doing our self-talk, we can get ourselves depressed. So how do we tell the difference? Because self-reflection is the first step of figuring anything out. And I think loneliness kind of feels like you're shrinking yourself. You're not being yourself because you don't want to be alone. You're reaching out to other people. You feel like you have to out of anxiety rather than true desire. And you find yourself tempted to go back into relationships that have drained you in the past or bothered you in the past just so you feel reconnected. Now, I would say that making space is a positive spin. You miss companionship, but you don't miss that dynamic. You're quieter socially, but more intentional. You're listening to your body. You're listening to your mind. You feel discomfort at being alone, but also relief because this in-between state of mind, state of friendship, it can be empowering, or if we let it, it can be depressing. But I would say that this in-between time isn't asking you to rush just to fill a void. Maybe we did that when we were younger. At this stage of life, it's asking you to listen, to reevaluate. What are your interests? What are your priorities at this stage of life and going forward? What fills you up? Now, one of the members of our community asked a really great question. How do you know if a long-term relationship that isn't perfect is worth saving? Well, I think when we talk about a friendship expiring, women in general start to worry that we're supposed to just completely let someone go. And there are a lot of options in between. So that statement is not true. Sometimes it's about boundaries. Sometimes it's about a discussion. Sometimes it's about putting a little space. And some friendships are long-term for a reason, and that's worth protecting, even if they aren't traditional. I've shared with you that I reconnected before COVID with my college roommates. Our new friendship is built on, I guess I would say it has deep roots, but we haven't nourished it in many, many years. I want to say over 30 years went by before we reconnected. So we'll go through periods. It's been about 4 years now since we've reconnected and see each other probably every 6 months, but we'll go for 3 or 4 months and not talk or not text or not set up a FaceTime. And it's not traditional. It's certainly nothing that I would have thought I would look forward to because we just don't see a lot of each other. But I've made the decision that having them in my life, even just a small amount, like I said, we live in vastly different parts of the country, and our ability to see each other is pretty limited to once or twice a year, but it's so worth it. And we pick up where we left off. So sometimes your history with another person is more important than what the friendship looks like today. And I was thinking about it the other day. I've got a friend coming into town in 2 days who moved to Florida, who retired to Florida about, a good 3 or 4 years ago now. And I rarely see her. She comes into town maybe once a year, and it doesn't even always work out that we're able to connect. But we shared a history, maybe about 15, 20 years we knew each other and saw a fair amount of each other. We had a lot of social groups that we both were involved in. And while our children weren't the same age, we enjoyed the same, interest outside of the family for many, many years. And it's not a traditional friendship anymore. And it would be real easy for me to say, hey, I don't have time to get together, but I want to keep that connection. It's not a traditional friendship, but I look forward to seeing her. I look forward to catching up. I don't feel like there are any topics that we can't talk about. But even if there were a couple of things that we just don't talk about anymore, that's okay. It's that connection. It's that relationship that kind of fills in this time of our life where a lot of our closer friends have moved away, have retired out of state, are taking care of grandchildren, maybe have a spouse who's ill, maybe they're ill. It's, maybe they've decided to travel at this stage of their life. There are just so many transitions happening to us right now. So there are definitely signs that a friendship has depth, and maybe not just history, but you want to maintain it. You find that when you get together with them, you don't have to perform. You can show up tired, not looking, like a beauty queen. Maybe you're preoccupied, but the relationship still holds water. It still fills you up. There's never any judgment or punishment. You can talk about whatever you feel like talking about without walking on eggshells, which is something we got to hold dear these days. Third, the friendship grows with you, or it allows you to grow and you allow them to grow. You're both allowed to evolve, and you find that the friendship, actually the relationship between the two of you, adapts instead of resisting. And that's that you're not judging each other. You're enjoying each other because your history is more important than whatever's going on in your lives today. Fourth, you feel steadier afterwards. Maybe not energized, maybe not thrilled, but you feel grounded and connected, and you feel like you've spent time filling yourself up. And finally, I would say that the bond isn't held together by force or fear. You're staying because you're not staying because you're afraid of being alone or afraid of hurting them or afraid that you won't find anyone else. You're in it because you're getting something out of it. And those are the friendships that don't we don't want to let expire. We just want to let them mature. And that's an important distinction. And I appreciate that question from our community. So why in this season of life does it deserve respect? Well, because this season isn't about failure. It's about recalibrating when you have a friendship that expires. Our age shouldn't limit our opportunities or our personal expectations. We've got a lot of life to live, and we are totally capable of finding new interests and new places to spend our time and new people to fill us up. So we have to stop and kind of relearn and rethink what kind of connection makes us feel comfortable and what are we not willing to tolerate anymore. It's really about rediscovering who you are without all the social noise, without the social rules that tell us who we are and aren't supposed to be. You know what? Do it your own way. You're not behind. You're not broken. And you're sure as heck not too old to form meaningful friendships at our age. Those friendships can look different. We're just between new chapters. So don't confuse loneliness with giving yourself some space to rethink what you want friendship to look like moving forward into your 60s, into your 70s, into your 80s. Hopefully we're here talking in our 90s. Now, next week, we're going to talk about what happens when you do decide, okay, I'm ready to get back out there and I do want to reconnect. Maybe it's going to look different. Maybe I'm not sure how it's going to look. So how do we form new friendships at this stage of life, new interests, take advantage of new opportunities? What should we look for? What do we have to stop settling for? And how do we open the door to new connections without forcing it and without feeling uncomfortable? So if you're like me, if you're in this quiet season right now and your social circle feels a little smaller than it used to be, or maybe a lot, or if you're wondering whether you made the right choice by letting go of a friendship, letting it expire, you're in the right place. Because if friendship is going to look a little different, we still have to decide for ourselves what we want it to look like for us. I'd love to hear what you've noticed, what you've learned through this stage of life. We have so many young women joining our community who are looking at many of us as mentors. And I think that's such a wonderful thing because, sure, I'm a 60-year-old woman, 68-year-old woman, and I'm trying to share what I've learned along the way, the good, the bad, the awkward, the uncomfortable, and what I wish I knew when I was in my 20s and my 30s, even my 40s and 50s for that matter. We've all been burned. We've all had friendships that didn't end well, and we've all had friendships just fizzle out. We move on, different season. But now we're at a stage of our life where we do get to choose. We don't have little ones. If we're blessed to have our health and even if we do have some limitations, how we spend our time is up to us and who we spend our time with. So maybe I should say that differently. How we spend our time may not totally be up to us, but generally who we spend our time with. When we look at friendship, this is different than family. We get to have boundaries and we get to be a change agent for ourselves. And I'm really tired of people telling me, oh, wow, you're 60. What do you care about friendship? Well, look forward to seeing you next time on the channel. Take care.